engineering to innovation, creativity in our health industry. And one of the nice things to say here is that Ross Kerridge and I sit on a very select group called the Royal Newcastle Hospital Heritage Group, which was set up when the hospital closed to carry on traditions, to ensure that the values and principles of the Royal Newcastle are carried into the modern era. So for somebody like me to be on this committee and to sit down with the likes of Peter Henry and John Duggan and Bert Evans and to hear the story, the history of health in the Hunter, and it is one continuous story of innovation, and it's a story that often comes right back to the importance of Chris McCaffrey. What makes this group singular is that it's driven by this wonderful woman, Betty Capper, who is our next speaker. Betty is a magnificent record keeper, a memory person, a reminder, and one who literally cares for each and every one of us to make sure that we live long lives, and she's lived a long life. She's a person who is a registered nurse and midwife, completed her general nurse training at Royal Newcastle Hospital from 1946 to 1950, and midwifery training at King George V Memorial 1951. Holds a degree in arts, a Master of Educational Studies, and a PhD in history from the University of Newcastle. She is after retiring from nursing, she worked to perpetuate the memory of the Royal Newcastle Hospital and has been presently Secretary of the Royal Newcastle Heritage Trust, as I said, from 2006 to the present day. She's got a wonderful range of publications. I'd love to go into the detail, but I think it's more important that we hear Betty. Thank you very much, Betty.
Good evening. Tonight, I must apologise. I don't have any pictures. I had some wonderful pictures of the Royal, which is now not in existence. But in the British television comedy, my computer said no when I tried to burn the disc. So I do apologise. Tonight I'm going to speak about a period of innovation, invention and great change in hospital management. There is an anonymous saying that says, "Do not follow where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." This succinct statement is apt for a trailblazer like Dr. Chris McCaffrey. The development and work of Dr. McCaffrey as a unique, vigorous, innovative and significant leader shaped healthcare and hospital management at Royal Newcastle Hospital. From the 1940 to 1965, he was medical superintendent of the Royal Newcastle Hospital, and without doubt, he was the most brilliant, charismatic and dominant personality in the Royal's 187th years of history. The McCaffrey era at the Royal led to innovation, challenges and changes in healthcare for the Newcastle community and beyond. He was a diverse personality, depicted at various times as a communist, a fascist, the most humble of men, a megalomaniac, a soft-hearted man, a cold-blooded man, totally devoid of emotion, an atheist and an arch-papist. So it gives you a lot of... I will trace the changes. The changes had for patient care under Dr. McCaffrey's leadership to a point, the implications and changes it had for patients and the staff. The hub of patient care, wellbeing and management was centred on the hospital wards. However, without first reflecting on the traditional pattern of hospital management in the 1940s and 50s in Australia, the innovations and changes instituted by Dr. McCaffrey cannot be properly appreciated. Throughout Australia, the pattern of nursing management was similar. Responsibility and authority for the nursing practice and nursing education was vested in the matron. Ward Sisters Authority for Nursing Practice and Nursing Education were responsible to the matron at all times. Even here, the ward sister was obliged to keep tight control on the regimes of the numerous doctors visiting the ward in order to anticipate the reactions and or complications arising from a variety of treatments. All the supplies in the ward were ordered by the ward sister, stored appropriately, and arrived and checked in and counted frequently. Supplies such as stationery, bed linen, medications and drugs, meals, fluids and special diets, dressing, sterilisation and equipment were in her charge. Since the sister's desk was the hub of activity and the centre of the network of communications, it was rarely possible for her to leave that desk for any length of time. I use the word her, the feminine gender here, because in this era there were no male registered nurses in the general hospital. That didn't start until the end of the 1960s. The matrons were not very happy about having males in their domain. In other words, she nursed the desk, or in Air Force vernacular, she flew a mahogany bomber. She presided over the flow of patient from admission to their discharge, and her responsibilities required an early start at 7 a.m. and often extended late into the evening when the honorary doctors did their rounds. And particularly in the surgical wards after a busy operating list. The skill of the ward sister at that period in managing a complex set of activities, bringing order to a considerably chaotic system, was essential to the medical staff. By the mid-50s, Dr. McCaffrey had coined the axiom at Royal Newcastle Hospital of nurses for nursing. And it was a revolutionary thing because nurses had many, many tasks before he came. It had become firmly established practice by then. Several principles were paramount in influencing nursing. There was acceptance of a central objective by the institution, its departments and services, which incorporated the concept of the patient as the reason for the undertaking. Duties, responsibilities and authority was distributed according to workflow, to qualifications, and to some extent according to the natural abilities and characteristics of personnel. Administrative structures were devised to safeguard the above two principles and to enhance their continuance. The objectives of service for the patient, if that was possible, rehabilitation and prevention was the hallmark unifying departments, services and personnel. The contribution from each department was important in achieving the central purpose, and the notion of interdependency of services and departments made sense and gave perspective to the place of nurses and doctors in the organisation. It became obvious that the object of the patient is the most important person in the organisation was established in practice. Consistent with this with the principle of patient at the centre of the spectrum of care was extended to include the care of the patient after discharge, not only domiciliary services for those who needed it, but a system of care was commenced whereby a rehabilitation centre interwoven with the hospital and the continuity provided continuity of care. Domiciliary nursing care, a new concept in Newcastle, was keenly instigated and keenly watched by Dr. McCaffrey and his staff specialists And that was the beginning of the Newcastle scene in the aged care. Remember, they had a very, very good aged care under in charge of Dr. Gibson and Sister Lee Hughes and Grace Parbury, who was the social worker. So it was a wonderful integrated system. And it has since, when I've been around in this, been followed by other hospitals. It did at the time get quite a bit of criticism, I can assure you. Management courses for senior administrators and middle management were part of ongoing teaching. The courses were taught across departments and disciplines, thus increasing the flow of communication. The staff, for instance, when Dr. McCaffrey instigated a clerical school at Newcastle Hospital, and that was a wonderful innovation. And the nurse teachers were involved in that, in teaching medical terminology to the students. And so it made that we had a clerical stream where we had clerical people who were very well trained in the hospital management. By the 1950s, nursing staff was relieved of many of their former responsibility. Clerical aides were introduced to attend to the paperwork on the ward. Streamlining admission and discharge procedures had been reduced to a minimum. Ward clerks and couriers were introduced to answer telephone and to run messages. And these people became quite a innovation into the wards, because they were on the wards all the time, and they did all of this work which the sister previously had to do, and of course did not do. The patient care in the era before Dr. McCaffrey was carried out by student nurses, and they were the least qualified, whereas the most qualified person in the ward was too busy with paperwork and laundry and all of the various, and also when I first started training the sisters, the food was brought in by a trolley to the centre of the ward, and the sister had to then stop it, and she had to serve from that trolley all the patients, and the nurses carried the food to the patients. It was a long process, and when we had all of these extra people in the ward, it just made the patient care flow. Ward clerks and couriers were introduced to answer telephone and to run messages. This forced the nursing staff to devote time to the patient, their relatives, particularly on admission, discharge or death of a patient, rather than being diverted to associated clerical staff. The introduction of a impress system whereby supplies, materials and services were the responsibility of the appropriate departments. Dietary was responsible to the dietitians, and the director of dietetics organised all of the food, and she had it was a training school for dietitians, and also they organised all the meals and served the meals. They were served, and the nurses had time to be with the patients to make sure they ate their meal, and of course feed patients who couldn't feed themselves. The pharmacy, laundry, stationery, central sterilising released nurses from management of these responsibilities. Allocations were made to each ward on the basis of need and bed occupancy, and arrived ready for use. An empty linen trolley was replaced by a full one by the laundry staff, who were in charge of all the laundry. The laundry manager was in charge of all the laundry and was responsible to get it to the wards and get it from the wards and launder it. Stationery cupboards were kept supplied by the clerical staff, and meals were supplied by the dietary department and arrived on trays ordered individually by the patient. Sterile supplies were obtained from the central sterilising department. The person in charge of the sterilising department was a science graduate with that special skill. So all of these people, each department was run by an expert. And they were responsible for material and equipment and accountable for their accurate sterilisation, which meant all instruments, etc., were in the central sterilising department instead of duplicated in all wards that the nurses had to sterilise. Many of the innovations commented at RNH have become the structure and practice of many institutions, and the style of personal performance of the individual health profession must be attributed to the excess of the administrative and personal leadership of Chris McCaffrey. Chris McCaffrey was well known not only in Australia but internationally as well. Malcolm Melechin of Chicago, a doyen of hospital administration at that time, was one of numerous visitors to RNH during the 1960s, and he described McCaffrey as one of the greatest administrators he had met. Others saw Chris McCaffrey in a different light. To some, a charismatic leader, to others, a benevolent despot, to others again, a domineering, devious and ruthless when cost. However, leaving all questions of personality and judgment aside, there is little doubt that Dr. McCaffrey and the band of devotees he gathered around him in the 1950s anticipated and put into place most of the innovations in healthcare and hospital administration in hospitals today. Unfortunately, he wrote almost nothing in his innovations, which are now rediscovered and implemented across the healthcare scene. As Deputy Medical Superintendent and Director of Surgery, the late Dr. John Smythe stated, "Together, Chris McCaffrey and his staff of specialists, nurses, professionals, administrators and other ranks of staff ran a great hospital, our hospital, as we called it, a kind of pie in the sky. The greatest years were from 1952 to 1965. It was with a great sadness when it fell apart."
Would you agree that Chris McCaffrey encouraged a teamwork approach?
Oh yes, he did. And he encouraged a team of experts to be with him. All of these people that you've mentioned, as I said, in each department there was an expert that ran that department and who ran a very innovative, from the dietary to pharmacy to the laundry. I mean, the laundry brought in many, many things. I can remember attending laundry meetings with the manager, and they had wonderful ideas for keeping the laundry up. And it was just a pleasure that we had laundry, because before that, at long weekends when the laundry was closed for 3 days, it could become a nightmare in hospital getting for the sister, and she used to hide her laundry because it was just hopeless. So he had encouraged the experts.
How did you feel when the York Week came down?
I didn't look at it.